The snow had fallen for 3 straight days across the high mesas of Arizona, blanketing the earth in a silence so deep it seemed to swallow even the wind. Taza, a strong Apache hunter with calm, storm-gray eyes, moved through the drifts with a bow slung across his back and the breath of his horse steaming like smoke. In the bitter air, he had been tracking elk, but the storm had driven all life into hiding except for one faint cry that reached his ears through the stillness. It was a sound no man could ignore, a woman's cry, weak and trembling, carried on the wind. Following it, Taza pushed through the snow until he saw her. A young Apache woman collapsed beside a fallen pony, her dark braids stiff with frost, her skin pale beneath the storm. Her name, he would later learn, was Nalin, daughter of a medicine man from a distant band. She had tried to cross the mountain, pass alone to find food for her people, but had been trapped by the blizzard. When Taza knelt beside her, his rough hands brushed the snow from her lashes, and for a heartbeat, her dark eyes opened to meet his eyes filled with both fear and relief. Without hesitation, he lifted her into his arms, wrapping her in his fur cloak. The cold bit into his skin, but he did not feel it. All that mattered was the fragile heartbeat against his chest. The storm roared again, as if the spirits were testing him. But Taza tightened his hold and whispered in Apache, "You will not die today." He led his horse toward the canyon shelter he knew nearby, fighting against the wind that clawed at him. Behind them, the snow erased their tracks, sealing the beginning of a story neither of them had expected, a story born from ice, danger, and the fragile warmth of two souls who had found each other in the heart of winter. The storm worsened as Taza guided his horse through the narrow canyon trail, the wind screaming like angry spirits across the white ridges. Snow stung his face, and the animal beneath him stumbled often. But he never loosened his hold on the unconscious woman. At last, he found the small cave he had used once during a hunting journey, its mouth hidden behind a thick curtain of frozen vines. Inside, the space was dark but dry, the air still holding a faint memory of warmth from fires long past. Taza laid Nalin gently upon a pile of pine boughs and hurried to gather wood from the stash he'd kept years ago. His hands, raw and red, trembled as he struck flint against steel until a spark caught, and soon a golden glow filled the cave. He peeled off his fur cloak and covered her, then warmed his palms and rubbed them along her arms, coaxing life back into her limbs. When her eyelids fluttered open again, confusion filled her gaze, then fear, until she saw the kindness in his face, the quiet strength that told her she was safe. "You are far from your people," he said softly in Apache. Her lips trembled before she whispered, "I went for food. I thought I could make it back before the snow came." Her voice cracked, and he saw the guilt behind her words. She had risked her life for others, and nearly lost it. Taza nodded slowly. "The mountain is cruel to the brave," he said, handing her a strip of dried meat from his pouch. She accepted it, her fingers brushing his. The contact was brief but sent a warmth through both of them, stronger than the fire's glow. Outside, the storm howled and the snow fell heavy, sealing them inside their small world of flickering light and fragile peace. For the first time in many moons, Taza felt something stir in his heart, something beyond duty or survival. As Nalin leaned closer to the fire, her hair glimmering like black silk in the light, he realized that this night, meant for death, had given him something precious instead, a reason to hope again. Morning came quietly, the storm easing into a soft, ghostly hush. The mouth of the cave was sealed halfway with snow, but the faint light that filtered through painted everything in silver. Taza stirred from where he had been sitting against the stone wall, his bow resting beside him, his eyes heavy but alert. Nalin still slept, wrapped in his fur cloak, her breathing deep and steady now. He watched her for a long moment, the faint rise and fall of her chest filling him with relief he could not quite explain. When she finally awoke, She blinked at the world round her, then looked at him with gratitude that needed no words. "You saved my life," she murmured. Taza shook his head gently. "The spirits guided me," he replied, though in truth, he knew it had been something more, something that had pushed him to leave his own hunting path that morning. He rose and checked the cave entrance, using his knife to carve a narrow gap for air. Outside, the land lay buried beneath drifts higher than a horse's back. "We will not leave today," he said, returning to her side. "The snow is deep. It will take time before the trail opens." Nalin nodded, pulling the fur closer. She looked fragile in that moment, yet there was fire in her eyes, strength that reminded him of the women in his own tribe, those who had stood beside warriors and endured hunger and loss. "You live alone?" she asked softly. He hesitated. "My people moved south. I stayed. The land here remembers me." A small smile touched her lips. "Then perhaps the spirits wanted you to stay for this." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed. Between them something that neither dared name, but both felt deep within. As the fire crackled and the wind sighed outside, they shared a quiet meal of dried meat and melted snow water. The world had narrowed to this cave, this warmth, this fragile thread of life between them. Taza had survived countless winters before, but this one felt different. It wasn't just survival anymore, it was connection. And somewhere deep within him, a seed of longing began to grow. The second day in the cave brought a strange peace neither of them expected. The snow outside had stopped falling, yet the world remained buried beneath its weight, silent and endless. Taza spent the morning repairing his bowstring and checking the cave's supply of wood, while Nalin worked to dry her soaked clothing beside the fire. Her hands were nimble and graceful, and though her body still ached from the cold, her spirit seemed to awaken with the light. Taza watched her quietly as he worked, noticing the determination in her movements. When she caught him looking, she smiled faintly, a small, uncertain smile that warmed the cold air between them. "When I was a child," she said softly, "my father told me that the snow is the sky's way of testing our hearts." Taza looked up from his work, his voice low. "Then the sky must think we are strong." She laughed quietly, the sound soft as wind through pine needles. As the day passed, they shared stories to pass the time. She told him of her village far beyond the river, of the children waiting for her return, of the hunger that had driven her into the mountains. He spoke of his days as a scout, of the battles that had scattered his band, and of the loneliness that had followed. The fire between them burned low, casting long shadows that seemed to dance across the cave walls like spirits, listening to their words. When evening came, Nalin grew quiet, staring into the flames. "If I do not return soon," she whispered, "my people will believe I'm gone." Taza's jaw tightened. "Then we will return together," he said firmly. She looked at him, her eyes glistening in the dim light. "Why would you risk your life again for someone you barely know?" He hesitated, searching for words he had never needed before. "Because I cannot watch the snow take another good heart," he said finally. The silence that followed was deep and full of unspoken feeling. Nalin looked down, her lashes trembling, and for the first time in many winters, Taza felt warmth bloom in his chest, an unfamiliar but welcome ache of something he had long forgotten, love. The third morning dawned cold and bright, sunlight glinting off the snow like 1,000 mirrors. The storm had passed, leaving behind a frozen world so still it felt sacred. Taza stepped outside the cave for the first time in days, his boots sinking deep into the white drifts. The air burned his lungs, but it was clean, alive. From the ridge, he could see the distant line of pine trees bending under the snow's weight. For a moment, he closed his eyes and whispered a quiet prayer in Apache to the mountain, to the wind, and to the spirits who had guided him to her. When he returned to the cave, Nalin was waiting by the fire, her long hair loose round her shoulders, her cheeks pink from warmth. She smiled when she saw him, a sight that stirred something deep in his chest. "The storm has passed," he said. "By tomorrow, we can travel." She nodded, though a flicker of sadness crossed her eyes. "I should be glad," she said softly. "But this place, it feels safe." Taza paused, unsure what to say. He felt it to the strange comfort of their small world of firelight and silence, where no hunger, no war, no sorrow had touched them. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "the spirits give us a quiet place to remember who we are." She looked up at him, her gaze lingering as if she wanted to memorize his face. Later, as they prepared for the journey, she helped him pack his supplies, their hands brushing often, each touch sparking a warmth that had nothing to do with fire. When evening came, they sat side by side at the cave's entrance, watching the sun sink into the snowy horizon. The world glowed gold and crimson, painting their faces in light. "You will see your people again," Taza said, "and they will know your courage." Nalin turned to him, her eyes soft but steady. "And what of you?" she asked quietly. "When I go home, what will you do?" Taza looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I do not yet know," he said, "but I will remember the sound of your voice in the storm." The wind carried his words away, but the meaning lingered between them, quiet, powerful, and real. That night, the temperature fell again, the cold sharper than a knife. The fire sputtered low, shadows stretching long across the stone walls as Taza and Nalin huddled closer for warmth. Neither spoke for a long time. The silence between them was not empty but full of meaning, like the pause before a heartbeat. Outside, the moon rose over the frozen ridges, turning the snow into a silver sea. Taza could feel her shivering beside him, even beneath the fur. Without hesitation, he wrapped his arm round her shoulders, drawing her near. She tensed for a breath, then relaxed, resting her head against his chest. The steady rhythm of his heartbeat seemed to chase away the cold. "You have the heart of a warrior," he murmured. "But warriors are not meant to fight alone." Nalin closed her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "Nor are hunters meant to wander without a home." Her words struck something. Deep inside him, a truth he had tried to ignore for years. He had lived as a shadow since his people scattered, believing himself bound only to the land. But now, with her beside him, he felt that perhaps home was not a place at all, it was a person. The firelight danced across her face, highlighting the curve of her cheek, the strength in her jaw, the quiet resilience in her eyes. "When the snows melt," he said softly, "I will take you back to your people, and if they will have me, I will help them hunt again." Her eyes widened in surprise. "You would do that," he nodded. "Your courage deserves to be answered with loyalty." A tear slipped down her cheek, and she turned her face toward his, her breath mingling with his in the cold air. For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to hold still. No wind, no sound, only the quiet thunder of two hearts finding the same rhythm. She leaned closer, and Taza did not move away. The kiss they shared was tender, hesitant, yet filled with the fire of something unspoken finally set free. Outside, the wind sighed through the canyon, and in that moment, the lonely hunter and the lost woman were no longer either. They were simply two souls who had found warmth in a world of ice. When dawn broke, the world was calm and pale beneath a sky of soft gray. The air held a crisp stillness that carried the scent of pine and thawing snow. Taza rose early, his breath visible in the cold air, and stepped outside to study the land. The snow had begun to soften. Travel would soon be possible. As he looked out across the endless white, he felt the quiet tug of two paths, the one that led him back to his solitary life, and the one that would follow Nalin home. Behind him, her voice broke the silence. "The sun is kind today," she said softly, wrapping a fur around her shoulders as she joined him. He turned to her, his expression gentler than the morning light. "Yes," he said, The spirits are giving us a chance." She smiled faintly. "Then we should not waste it." They packed their supplies together, careful and deliberate, as though preparing to leave a sacred place. The cave that had been their shelter now felt like part of their story, its stone walls still echoing the laughter and whispers they had shared. Before leaving, Nalin placed her hand on the rough wall. "This place gave me life," she said, "and it gave me you." Her words lingered in the cold air like a prayer. They began their journey down the mountain, the snow crunching beneath their boots, their breath rising in small clouds. The forest was quiet, but no longer hostile. The danger had passed, leaving only beauty in its wake. Taza led the way, cutting through drifts and clearing the path, but often turned back to offer his hand to Nalin. She took it each time, her fingers fitting easily against his. The trail wound through pines heavy with frost, past frozen streams that glittered like glass. When they stopped to rest beside a fallen log, Nalin looked toward the distant valley. "My village lies beyond those hills," she said, hope brightening her voice. Taza followed her gaze, then nodded. "Then that is where we will go." She looked at him quietly, her dark eyes reflecting the snow's light. "And when we reach it," she asked softly, "will you stay?" He did not answer at once, but the small, knowing smile that touched his lips said everything her heart needed to hear. By midday, the snow began to melt in thin rivulets that sparkled as they trickled down the slopes. Ravens called from the treetops, and somewhere far below, the sound of running water whispered that spring would not be long. Nalin walked beside Taza now, her steps steady despite the fatigue in her limbs. The journey was not easy each mile was a test of strength, and will but the thought of home pushed her forward. Several times she stumbled, and each time Taza reached out a hand without a word, steadying her with the quiet assurance of someone who had long walked between danger and endurance. Their silence was comfortable, full of unspoken trust. When they reached a narrow gorge, they stopped to rest. The wind there was soft, carrying the faint scent of juniper and smoke. Nalin turned to him, her face touched with sunlight. "When I left my village," she said, "I thought I would die alone in the storm. But I think the spirits meant for you to find me." Taza looked at her, his eyes the color of distant rain. "And perhaps," he said slowly, "they meant for you to remind me that life is not meant to be lived in silence." As they descended further, the first traces of green appeared beneath the melting snow, small shoots of grass, stubborn and bright. It felt like hope taking root in the world again. By evening, they reached the valley floor. The landscape opened before them, wide and familiar. Smoke rose faintly from the horizon, and Nalin's breath caught in her throat. "That is my village," she whispered. Emotion trembled in her voice, relief, joy, disbelief. Taza followed her gaze, his chest tightening. He had known this moment would come, but the thought of letting her go now felt like losing something he had just begun to understand. "We will reach it by nightfall," he said quietly. She nodded, but her eyes lingered on his face, as if she, too, felt the weight of what waited ahead. They walked on, side by side, through the fading light, and though the world was thawing round them, it was the warmth between their joined hearts that truly melted the last of winter's hold. As dusk settled, the sky turned a deep rose over the snowy valley, and the faint smoke of Nalin's village grew closer with every step. Dogs barked in the distance, and figures began to appear, men and women rushing from their lodges as they spotted two silhouettes emerging from the white hills. Nalin's name rang through the air like a song carried by the wind. She stopped for a moment, overcome by emotion, her breath catching as tears filled her eyes. Her people surrounded her with cries of joy, embracing her as though she had risen from the dead. The elders came forward, their lined faces soft with wonder, while the children clung to her skirts, laughing and weeping at once. Taza stood slightly apart, watching quietly, his heart swelling with both pride and ache. He had brought her home fulfilled, the promise he made beneath the storm. But with each passing moment, he felt the distance between them widening, like a river forming between two shores. When Nalin turned and saw him standing there, half hidden in the twilight, she stepped through the crowd and came to him. Her people watched in silence as she reached for his hand, her fingers trembling but sure. "You should come," she said softly. "You saved me. You belong among us now." Taza hesitated, the weight of many lonely years pressing on him. He looked at the village, the warmth of firelight spilling from the lodges, the scent of food, the sound of laughter, all things he had long forgotten. "I am a wanderer," he said quietly. "I do not know the ways of your people, any more Nalin's. Eyes shone with determination. Then let them become your ways again. You have walked alone long enough." The wind moved gently between them, carrying the murmurs of approval from her kin. For a long heartbeat, Taza searched her face, seeing not pity but strength and invitation. Not to stay out of duty, but to live. Slowly, he nodded. "If the spirits will it," he said, "then my path ends here." Her smile broke through the shadows like sunlight after storm clouds, and she whispered, "Then may your heart find peace, Taza of the mountains." That night, the village celebrated beneath the stars, their fires glowing warm against the endless snow. The drums echoed softly through the valley, steady as a heartbeat, as laughter and songs of gratitude rose into the clear, cold sky. Nalin sat beside her father, the old medicine man whose eyes filled with tears as he touched her face, whispering blessings to the spirits for her safe return. Yet her gaze kept drifting toward the edge of the gathering, where Taza stood quietly, watching the firelight dance over the people he had once thought lost to him forever. The children, curious and unafraid, came to him first, asking about his bow, his horse, his time in the mountains. Slowly, the others followed, warriors offering handshakes, elders giving nods of respect. The circle that had once been broken round him began to close again. When Nalin approached, the crowd seemed to fade away. She wore a blanket of soft deerskin round her shoulders, her dark hair shimmering in the light. "You belong here," she said softly, her voice like the crackle of the fire, gentle, sure, alive. "The spirits didn't send you to save me, Taza. They sent you to find yourself." His gaze met hers, and in her eyes he saw not just gratitude but love, steady, fearless and true. Slowly, he took her hand in his, feeling the pulse of life there, warm and certain. Round them, the snow reflected the fire's glow, turning the night into a shimmering world of gold and white. As the drums continued, the medicine man rose and placed his hand over theirs. Two hearts that faced the storm together should not walk separate paths, he said solemnly. The people cheered, their voices echoing through the mountains. Taza looked at Nalin, the woman who had brought warmth back into his life, and smiled a rare, quiet smile that carried the promise of tomorrow. That night, as the stars wheeled above the white plains, the lonely hunter and the brave daughter of the tribe stood side by side, no longer lost to the world. The snow that once threatened their lives now glittered like a blessing round them, and in the heart of winter, love had found its home.